This is a story about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Once upon a time, there lived a lovely princess named Snow White. Her lips were red as roses and her hair was the deepest ebony. Snow White's father, the king, had died, so she lived in the castle with her stepmother, the queen. The queen was very pretty, but also very cruel. She was jealous of Snow White's beauty and treated her like a servant. Snow White was obedient and hard-working. She dreamed that someday a prince would take her away. One afternoon, Snow White was at the well when a handsome prince did appear. He had heard her singing and was enchanted by her voice and her beauty. Snow White was too shy to speak to him, so she ran up to a balcony. But she could tell that the prince was kind, and she smiled at him. He smiled back and serenaded her. On impulse, she kissed a dove and sent it to him so that he would always remember her. The queen had seen what had happened. She walked to her magic. Each day, she stood in front of it and asked,
"Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?"
Usually, the magic mirror told her that she was. But that day, it replied that Snow White was the fairest. The queen flew into a rage. She called her royal huntsman into throne room and commanded him to take Snow White deep into the forest and kill her.
"But your majesty, the little princess,"
he cried, shocked. The queen would not listen. She had made up her mind. Soon, the huntsman took Snow White into woods. But he could not bring himself to hurt her.
"Run away, hide in the woods, anywhere. Never come back,"
he said. Snow White ran and ran, but everywhere she turned, she saw something scary in the dark woods. She fell to the ground, sobbing. A fawn walked toward her, then a chipmunk, a squirrel, and a bunny. Snow White raised her head. "Oh," she cried. "The animals all ran away."
"I'm awfully sorry, I didn't mean to frighten you,"
she said. The animals could tell how kind Snow White was, so they walked back over to her.
"Maybe you know where I can stay?"
she asked. Soon, the animals began to lead her through the woods. At last, they came to a cottage. "Oh, it's adorable," Snow White said. "Just like a dollhouse." Snow White knocked, but no one answered the door. "Hello," she called. "May I come in?" When no one answers, she and the animals went inside. She noticed 7 tiny chairs and a table piled high with dishes. She wondered who lived there. "Must be 7 little children," she said. She looked around some more and found a shoe in a pot. Cobwebs and dust were everywhere. Then she had an idea. "I know, we'll clean the house and surprise them, then maybe they'll let me stay." Snow White and the animals got to work scrubbing, sweeping, and washing. The princess and her friends worked all day. When the downstairs was clean, she went upstairs and saw 7 tiny beds with names carved in them. "Doc, Happy, Sneezy, Dopey, what funny names for children," she remarked. "Grumpy, Bashful, and Sleepy. I'm a little sleepy myself." So, she lay down on the bed and took a nap. Close by, 7 little men had just left the mine where they worked. They were dwarfs, and they lived in the cottage that Snow White had just tidied. They were glad to be going home. When the dwarfs reached their cottage, they noticed smoke coming from the chimney. They were worried about an intruder, so they decided to sneak inside. They opened the door quietly. No one was there, but they noticed that the whole place had been cleaned. Just then, Happy noticed something cooking in the kettle over the fireplace. He was about to take a spoonful when Grumpy cried,
"Don't touch it. It might be poison."
The dwarfs looked around nervously. They realized the intruder must be upstairs. They sent Dopey to investigate. He went reluctantly, then ran back down. He couldn't speak, but he gestured to show the others what he had seen. "He says it's a monster asleep in our beds," Doc exclaimed. The dwarfs grabbed their pickaxes and went upstairs. They sneaked into the bedroom and saw Snow White laying on their beds. "Why, it's a girl," Doc said. "She's beautiful, just like an angel," Bashful said. Soon, Snow White woke up. She guessed the names of all the dwarfs: Sleepy, Grumpy, Happy, Doc, Dopey, Sneezy, and Bashful. Snow White offered to cook and clean if she could stay with them. When the dwarfs found out that she was a princess, and a good cook, they agreed. After convincing them to wash up for supper, Snow White and the dwarfs all are together. Then they danced around the cottage and Snow White told a story. Everyone had a wonderful time, even Grumpy. Snow White was so glad to have found her new friends. Back at the castle, the queen consulted her magic mirror. But instead of telling her that she was the fairest one all, it revealed that Snow White was still alive, and living at the dwarf's cottage. The queen knew that she had to take matters into her own hands. She decided to make a potion that would turn her into an old hag. She mixed everything together and drank it. Suddenly her hair turned white. Her face became wrinkled, and her robe was transformed into rags. She hobbled over to her book of spells and found the one she was looking for. One taste of the poison apple, and the victim's eye will close forever in a sleeping death. She read. The only cure was love's first kiss. The queen knew that once Snow White bit into the apple she would never wake up. She dipped the apple in her cauldron and set out to find the princess. The next morning, Snow White made the dwarfs a hearty breakfast. Then, she gave each of them a kiss before they left for work. The queen soon appeared at Snow White's window dressed as the old hag. She held the poisoned apple out to Snow White. The princess's animal friends tried to warn Snow White not to take it, but she didn't understand and shooed them away. So, the animals ran to the mine to get the dwarfs. The queen told Snow White the apple was a magic one. One bite and all your dreams will come true, she said. Snow White bit into the apple after wishing that her true love would come and whisk her away to his castle. Then, she fell to the floor, as still as death. The dwarfs arrived at the cottage just as the queen was leaving. They knew that she was up to no good, so they chased after her. A thunderstorm broke out, but that didn't stop the dwarfs. They followed the queen into the forest and up a narrow cliff. She tried to move a huge rock, so it would roll down on top of the dwarfs and crush them. At that moment, lightning struck. The queen lost her balance and fell to her doom. When the dwarfs returned to the cottage, they found Snow White lying on the floor. She was so beautiful that they could not bring themselves to bury her. So, they built a bed of gold and glass and kept watch over her day and night. Then one day, a handsome prince rode into the forest. He was the same prince who had seen Snow White at the well. He knelt down and kissed her tenderly. Snow White's eyes fluttered open. She was awake. The dwarfs celebrated. Then Snow White kissed them goodbye and rode off with the prince. And they all lived happily ever after. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.